the injury issues there. Obviously, Jesus is the latest one, and it looks like a serious one, probably season-ending. Looks like the ACL. I mean, before we get on to what that means for Arsenal in January and the need for a striker, how big a blow is that to the club, but also to the player more so?
Well, to the player, it's a massive blow. You know, he's fought back from a couple of really bad knee injuries in the last couple of years, and this certainly looks like being the worst of the lot. And, 27 years old, facing up to potentially, certainly 9 months, but maybe a year on the sidelines, just got himself back into the team and started scoring goals as well. So it's a huge blow to him, but it's a huge blow to the club as well. I know Jesus, maybe his long-term future might not have been Arsenal, and, there was probably a decision to be made in the summer when it came to him, but he was still an important part of this squad and was going to have to play a really important part between now and the end of the season as well. So to lose him on the back of losing Bukayo Saka, it's just another experienced senior player who's fallen by the wayside and is set for a big spell on the sidelines. So it's a massive blow to him, to Arteta, to the club. And it's just a real shame for it to happen. But it kind of just sums up this season. As I said, survival of the fittest. Arsenal have just been, I've never known a season like it for injuries. Now, I think it really does hark back to too many games, too much football being played, and players are falling. And I'm not just talking about Arsenal here. You look around the leagues, not just in England but across Europe. Just so many players, top players, just going down to injuries because of, in my view, the sheer amount of football that is being played. And I don't think that's a good thing for football. I don't think it's a good thing for the quality of the game as well. And I think it's something that certainly has to be looked at. Unfortunately, we've got a summer of the World Club Championship coming up, haven't we? I mean, I think if Chelsea or City get to the final at that, they're going to have about 3 weeks rest before the start of the Premier League season, which is just madness. It just really is. And I think we're seeing these injuries that we're seeing now are a direct result of it.
Yeah, that is crazy. For Arsenal, it leaves Kai Havertz as the number one centre forward position as things stand. He's been a bit of a lightning rod for criticism after those 2 games, the missed chances against, there's one against Newcastle in particular that stood out, and then a few against Manchester United as well. Do you feel now, I know we've spoken about Arsenal will always be attentive, and Arteta said today in his press conference they're looking to be active. Do you feel now with this Jesus injury and the other injuries, but especially the Jesus in the striker position where so much sort of speculation has surrounded, is their hand forced now? Do they absolutely have to go out and get someone in January? Absolutely.
It would be madness for them not to do it. Absolute madness. It'd be basically waving the white flag and surrendering the season if they didn't go out and act now. They had to do it before the Jesus injury. On the back of Saka's injury, they needed to do it. But they certainly now have to. I mean, you've basically just got Havertz, Trossard, Martinelli. Am I missing someone? I'm trying to think. I mean, that's basically it for between now and the end of the season. Well, certainly between now and when Saka comes back. I mean, you're basically relying also on a 17-year-old Ethan Nwaneri coming back into the mix, which is crazy. He's a 17-year-old kid, and there's going to be so much pressure on him to come back and hit the ground running. So they absolutely have to go out and do some business and react to this. I think they will. I thought Arteta's comments in the press conference today were interesting. He certainly spoke more about transfers than he normally does. It's normally batted away, but he went into it quite in depth, I thought, today. And I certainly came away from those comments thinking they're going to act. They're going to have to act. They're not stupid. And as much as people like to say, Arteta's stubborn and he didn't do what he needed to do in the summer, which I agree with, by the way, he didn't, and the club didn't. They should have acted in the summer, but they absolutely have to act now. And he basically said it himself today. He knew that the options that he has available to him for the second half of the season is not enough. If they want to win the Premier League or have any chance of chasing Liverpool down, if they want to go deep into the Champions League, which they've got a really good opportunity of doing now, then they have to go out and act and give him more options to be able to rotate. I don't necessarily think they're going to go out and sign the player this month. It might have to be a loan, and then you go again in the summer and you look what you can do there in a more sort of long-term aspect. But I think a loan's probably the most likely option for now. But I do think they'll do some business.
Yeah, because obviously the names that have been linked, so many of them are so hard to get. They'll be hard to get in the summer. Isak is the one that's probably most linked, but he's going to cost well over £100 million. If Newcastle decide to sell, which they're certainly not going to do in January as well. So, who could maybe come in and fill that void? Do you think?
I think it's tough. It's tough looking around, but it's not kind of for me to say, is it? I think it's more for the Arsenal recruitment team to go out there and find someone who they believe that the stats suggest, the data suggests it fits this team, can come in and make a difference. There must be players out there. That's what they're paid big money to do, is to look at the market, to look and work out what the data says in terms of who fits the mold. I've seen Vlahovic is an interesting one, just because he's always seemingly linked with Arsenal. I'm always a bit suspect to it, because at the time when he was really heavily linked, I was always getting messages that it wasn't what was being said abroad, and all the stories were, it was a time when he was leaving Fiorentina, and I was being told that Fiorentina were using Arsenal's name, and his agents were using Arsenal's name to sort of drum up Juventus's interest and try and get the best possible deal for Fiorentina, which ultimately he did. So I'm always a little bit suspect when I hear Vlahovic now being linked, but maybe he could be an option if Juventus managed to sign Muani, who it seems like they are. Could they then be maybe open to doing a loan for Vlahovic? I'm not saying he is the guy. I'm yet to be convinced by him, but that could be an option potentially. And there must be others out there that the club have identified and are looking to do. I said it last week. I think that I would, if I was Arsenal, even if it means overpaying potentially this month, if you can somehow fast track something that you had identified for the summer, even if it means overpaying maybe £10 million too much now, it could be worth doing. Yes, it might be overpaying, but you get that player for an extra 6 months. It could benefit you next season, because he's already acclimatized during the 6 months to be ready to hit the ground running next season. The excuse that there's no one out there just doesn't stack up to me, because there are plenty of players out there who could improve this Arsenal team, and we're seeing players on the move this window. Kvaratskhelia from Napoli to PSG, for example, who I think would have been perfect for Arsenal. So there are players moving this window that are clearly available, who I think improve Arsenal. So that, I don't think that excuse stacks up. The club just have to go out there and find someone and do it very, very quickly.
Yeah, it seems like the situation dictates that they probably will have to overpay. Everyone knows they want a striker, so they probably will. But it's not like you're paying maybe that extra 20 or 30 million for this half of the season as well, aren't you, to save their season? So it's not like you'll be paying that much extra than you would in the summer. But there's good reason for that, and there's need for it. I feel you're right to say.
Sesko, for example, the striker they really, really wanted last summer that they were unable to get. And yes, he signed a new contract with Leipzig. And at that time, it was made very, very clear that he had decided he felt like staying for at least another year in Germany was the best sort of thing for his career and his development. And from my understanding, Arsenal weren't, disappointed. They were disappointed, but they weren't, he didn't burn any bridges with them by doing that. They could understand that decision. But if you look at it now, if you think, right, okay, we were going to go back for Sesko this summer. If it's the case of, all right, we have to offer Leipzig 15 million more and maybe really work on Sesko and convince him that if he comes now, he is going to play a lot of football and he's not going to find himself on the bench, then go out and do that. Just get it done now if you can. It can't be impossible. Everyone's got a price. And I think that the position that Arsenal are in at the moment, that if it means overpaying, then so be it. It just has to be done.
Yeah, you're right to point out a definite change in narrative almost from Arteta, because I had noted that in previous press conferences he was quite dismissive about the need for a new striker, pointed out that they were the top scorers in 2024 in the Premier League. Even this season only Liverpool and Tottenham have scored more. Their conversion rate's not actually that bad. They created a lot of chances against Newcastle and Man United, but I don't know if that, it's almost, there's two different sort of, the stats aren't backing up the eye test, and maybe the stats are being skewed by some big wins in there where they're racking up those numbers and not taking into account those 0-0s and the 1-0s and even the defeats that striker might get you some points out of. Is that that disparity? Until recently, it seemed like Arteta was saying that they didn't need a striker because they were scoring all these goals, pointing to that. It seems like that's a change in approach now.
Yeah. Well, I don't think he could really say anything different after the Jesus injury. I think he would have just looked so silly if he'd have sat there and still said we don't need anyone, because it's so apparent. That was a response to a question I asked him last week, actually, in the press conference when he said we're the top scorers in the Premier League. That was because I'd put it to him that, yes, you have scored a lot of goals, but I think it was 13 of their 30 games up to that point, they'd only scored 1 or 0 goals in a game in all competitions this season. They'd only won 2 of those games. Because I was in response to an answer he gave where he said it was sort of when you look at the small sample size. And I was like, well, it's not really a small sample size. It's actually quite a consistent sample size now. Yes, you score goals in a few games, but the majority, or certainly almost half your games, you're not scoring, or you're only scoring one. And that leaves so much jeopardy in a game, as we saw against Manchester United. Only scoring one, you end up losing on penalties because you couldn't get that important second goal. So he is right to point out the amount of goals they score, and the stats do sort of back him up in a way. But I think when you explore those stats more closely, you see a sort of overriding theme of just how many games are always in that jeopardy zone for Arsenal, because they just haven't scored enough to be able to sort of breathe easily and cruise through to a nice 2-0 or 3-0 win. Those games just don't happen enough right now for Arsenal.